interestingly point out and bring out in your narrative a very interesting contradiction that exists. You said Gen AI, and we all know Gen AI by definition is not deterministic. It's pretty open-ended, and models could change, so the responses could change. Whereas something as fundamental as software development lifecycle that, as we know, inherently asks us to be deterministic about every next step.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be interesting to see how these two marry each other.
Yeah.
And the entire approach to software development, how it incorporates a Gen AI first principles,
Mm-hmm.
and still able to deliver products at scale, which are currently restricted to prototypes and not to full-scale products.
Yeah, but I read an article about probably a year and a half ago. That was really interesting to talk about, the fact that if you think about AI in general, and if you think not AI just about the predictability and all of that, but you think about it as a programming model that is different. So we've been kind of working into a functional model that is, very kind of black and white. It works or it doesn't work. But if you think about the probabilistic model and the AI model as functions that can actually be executed just like the other way, it's just that they are not the typical functions that you have. They are backed by a neural network on the back end, but in the end, it's still very similar to concept as a function. Then if you start thinking about it that way, then it becomes a lot easier to think about the overall programming model that actually just evolving. It's just a different way of achieving the same goal. It's more probabilistic than it is, deterministic, but it's still, you can achieve the same level. But the challenge is that we are all trained, primarily to think in terms of a functional, in procedural way. And I think that, when you look at the engineers that work at Google, like the Jeff Deans and whatnot, I mean, their minds is not anymore in this, kind of the way we build software. Their minds is, in this kind of probabilistic model where basically they see just AI in general as a way to get programming done. And, the minute you think about it that way, it is a very different way of approaching problem solving.
Absolutely.
That, is yet a little bit more non-deterministic, but yet you can achieve a lot. I mean, you look at what, DeepMind has achieved and those kind of, they are able to get, a deterministic behavior to some extent on very non-deterministic, kind of problem solving, like the alpha folding that they do, or the Go, kind of, I can't remember what the name was for their Go game, kind of solver. Nobody thought that it would ever be solved, and it's the first thing that they actually got solved basically in their history. And so I think it's just, you have to get, as engineers, we have to start thinking and getting more comfortable with thinking in a different way of developing software at that level. And so I understand it's easy to say at 60,000 foot view level. It's more hard, next Monday when you go back to your desk and you say, well, how am I going to apply that? But I think that's where I think kind of understanding the fundamentals of, AI, LLMs, kind of neural networks and things like that, I think can help basically kind of, getting your mind more into that kind of way of thinking. And I think the more you learn about that, then I think the more comfortable you get into that world. And I think then the more valuable you're going to continue to be basically as engineers.
I hope the team here doesn't start giving estimates in probabilistic terms. That's going to lead to a lot of problems for all of us. But mindset change is definitely required, Joel. And I believe it's also required at the business end, right? So software services companies, especially in healthcare, have to realign themselves with an AI or Gen AI dependent world.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that shaping up? And how, if you had to identify, say, top 3 things that they should adapt to quickly, then what would your recommendation be?
Yeah, I think with every disruption, it's change. And the first reaction typically is people don't like change. Exactly. It's kind of interesting because people want change, but then when the change is there, they typically don't want to adopt it because it's still a change, and it changes your habit, and it does it, and obviously this particular change and kind of set of transition is really disruptive. And I think it's the first time that probably software engineers are feeling the level of disruption that they feel right now, because to some extent they are the one who wrote those technologies, and they are the one that are disrupted the most by those technologies. It's kind of funny, isn't it? That
somebody's written that, right?
Exactly.
Somebody's
Some engineers, or a lot of engineers, actually, in DeepMind and Google and OpenAI and whatnot, built this stuff. And yet we are, we are wondering, do I still have a job? How is that going to work? Am I going on the dead end? And so I think right now, first of all, there's still a lot of hype. I think the Gen AI tooling is good. I think we should use it, and we need to use it because it does make us better. But we're still not at a place where you can just push a button and just get everything done behind the scenes for you. Will we get there? Maybe we'll get there for some of the really simple things, probably pretty quickly. But for fully distributed applications that need to be multi-tenant, that need to be secure, that need to be all of that, there's not going to be one solution that you're going to press a button and get your thing done, and not needing any type of people that are in this room. But the reality is our job is changing. There's no doubt about it. Code generation is going to get automated more and more. I think Meta said last week that, 2 weeks ago they said, they believe that in 2025, they're going to have AI agents that are capable of doing a mid-level kind of engineer job. And that's just the reality. There's going to be a difference there of what being a software engineer is going to be basically post 2025 than it was pre 2023 to some extent, because just the technology landscape has evolved tremendously. We have access to tools nowadays that we didn't have. And that's always been the case. We've always had, when I started my career, we had, really primitive IDEs, screens, and we had, we had some level of integrated development environment, but they were just beginning. A lot of the documentation was paper, and magazines and books. We were talking about that with, Siddhar this morning about how, we learned about some of those technologies, in the past. We bought books and magazines, and there was no internet to learn about stuff. But the reality is that that's always what we do as in technology. If you work in technology, you've signed up for a career where you have to adapt and learn all the time. And we've been happy, or we've been lucky in the past that a lot of that stuff was more about, well, do I use React or do I use Angular or do I use this other thing? And so we felt more control of that. But here it's just another change that is coming. And you're going to have to realize where you really are bringing value versus, what a machine can do. And right now there's still, critical thinking. There's still creativity that those systems are really good at faking it, but they are not creative. They are not. They are just replicating things that they've seen before. And we still need people to think creatively about how to solve, hard problems. And so I think it's at that level you have to continue to develop that and kind of work on continuing to kind of hone on that. The other thing is just, I think, you have to be able to understand the fundamentals of the tools that you're using. You have to be able to use the fundamental, and the comments I made earlier about the kind of, AI versus kind of probabilistic model and non-deterministic model. You really have to lean into that and really understand what that means, because it's going to continue to, impact you. And so you can decide either to understand it or not, but not, then you're not going to be a very good engineer going forward, because you're going to be dealing with people that actually know what they are talking about at that level. And so you're going to be just relegated at doing things there that, are going to become more and more commoditized to some extent. So I think that's what we see right now. But the other thing also is that you also have to believe in that with every type of technology change and kind of big kind of disruption that's coming, there's a ton of opportunities that we don't see today that are going to open up. If you think about just when the automobile was, created, it took 120 years to get to a place where we are today, but nobody that actually, invented the automobile thought about what the the capabilities that automobile have created nowadays. And same thing about the internet when it was a DARPA project there about connecting, for the Department of Defense. And you look at what the internet has enabled overall, nobody would have said that's the same thing. You take the iPhone and whatnot. I think maybe Jobs had some ideas there about the disruption level that it would create, but look at what it has gotten us. And so I think that's what you have to keep in mind, is that today may look like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do and whatnot? But again, focus on the things that you control. If you focus on the creativity, on the problem solving, on the collaboration, on what humans really are supposed to do, if you're only interacting through a screen, then the machine can do that. Yeah. That's the reality is, yet you have to put yourself is what do humans do best? Yeah. We're social, kind of animals. We are social creatures. We need to interact with one another. When we are together, we solve great problems when we come together as groups. And so that plus the problem solving, plus the creativity, plus, kind of understanding the fundamental, plus stay agile or stay, kind of continue to learn. I think as long as we focus on that, then I think that we're putting the best chances to stay relevant into this and to take advantage of the new opportunities that are going to be there.
Example, I don't know how many of you know that when automobiles were introduced, the sales of the horse cart, which was the means of commute prior to that, it actually went up for the initial few years because people continue to take a position against the automobiles and continue to invest in horse cart. That brings me to my next question. There are still many skeptics who believe that Gen AI especially is a Frankenstein we have unleashed on ourselves. Mm-hmm. What's your position on that, Joel?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, with any type of kind of technology change, disruption that it brings. You can do a lot of good, but you can also do a lot of bad with it. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us is how do we keep the balance at that level? How do we stay and ensure that we are using this in a responsible manner? I think there are things that corporations need to do in terms of the usage of it. And I think everything that we control directly, we should actually, do the best and push the envelope of what we do to make sure that those things are not being abused and, kind of taking advantage of. But the reality is also there are companies that are just continually to actually kind of put new innovation on the market, and they are not necessarily waiting for the compliance regulations to be, catching up. And so it's up to all of us to really kind of just pay attention and really kind of understand what the impact of those things, what we are doing with them, are we going to get, how can they be abused? But yeah, I think there's a part of it that basically needs to catch up. And I think right now we're not there yet. I think there's a lot of work to do, for governments and whatnot to provide regulations around that. It's a really challenging, difficult thing to do for them because typically they are really kind of looking, there's a lag time for policies to actually be enacted. But I hope that we don't forget history because every time we've pushed, technologies fast for the sake of pushing them fast, we always end up kind of, having the whiplash after and just, end up with, things that we have to correct and clean up and whatnot. And so I think that we have to keep a balance there. I'm all for, being at the leading edge, but I don't want us to be at the bleeding edge. I think there's a fine line there.
Yes.
And I think that's where, we're not touching diagnostics, any of that. I mean, it's just way too sensitive right now in healthcare to do. There are others that probably can do that. But I think that there is going to be, just more and more abuse of those systems, with deepfakes and whatnot. And you look at the level of technologies or the level of sophistication that, from an audio and video standpoint.
Exactly. I mean, this is so insightful. And, what you were speaking about is actually relevant. So there is a fine line. There is still, if I have to summarize it, there is still the need for human in the loop. Mm-hmm. There is still need for all the engineers and the architects, present day architects and engineers to kind of stay relevant by, by kind of adopting this technology, but also taking it with a pinch of salt and applying their creativity, and which is what we are here for. So like you said, human beings are social beings, and we really need to get there. So this was absolutely insightful, and you did answer the most relevant question of how does one stay relevant. Talking about now the last question perhaps for today, and then we'll take you to a small fun rapid fire round. But how does, at this point that we are in, and where do you look at CitiusTech as your partner? And what is the message that you would want to give the citizens who are working with you at WellSky and others as well? That, how do we collaborate better with you? What are the maybe 3 or 5 things that we should look at? I mean, you did answer a lot of those questions, but just from the next maybe 1 or 2 years perspective window, how do we become better partners, and what is it that, will help you and help us grow together?
Yeah. No, I think it's pretty simple. I think we run a business, and as part of that, what we're looking for is partners that are helping us support the business. That's as simple as that. And so what that means is that, we are a product company, and, we live with the solutions that we are delivering to the market. How fast can clients get their hands on those software? And those need to run flawlessly. They are mission critical systems. Most of the time, they are used by really large organizations. So that just sets the background, and so that means that we need to deliver software faster at better quality than we've ever done before, because the level of, disruption and the level of, capabilities that are out there in the market is also meaning that in order to, catch up to some extent from a capability perspective for a competitor is shrinking. If you're fighting or competing against a company that actually is leaning in on AI-assisted technology to actually develop software, for instance, and they know what they are doing and the engineers are leaning in, they can catch up really, really quickly in mimicking and actually getting better than you at delivering that capability. And so you all have to kind of keep that in mind, because it's not just CitiusTech, it's like, it's the competitors of WellSky. It's within WellSky, we have teams that are pushing the boundaries, and so that's what I want from our partners, is the same level of urgency about leveraging those capabilities so that you are staying, or kind of you're helping us staying and leading to some extent in those competitive situations. That really is what it is. And how do we think creatively about quality engineering? How do we push the boundary at that level? How do we use the, Gen AI-based assistive coding and whatnot? How do we leverage that? How do we leverage those for making, kind of technology stack migration? And that's really what it is. And from a business perspective, I can tell you that we are expecting our partners also to just not continue on the same path as maybe the business model was before, but also giving us back some of those savings to some extent, at that level. So that's the whole kind of interesting disruption that's going on also in the market.
Absolutely. I think that you really use the right words, urgency. I think everybody has to feel the sense of urgency in adapting to the changing world. And like you said, if we can give you back the savings, I know that the money is going to be there, right? Yeah. It will just get spent in a different place. Right. And we still continue to have an opportunity to partner, right? So I think that's one fear which everybody needs to take out of their minds, that, we'll be out of a job, or we will. Yeah. I think we'll probably have better jobs to do than we are doing today. And I would like to take it that way and feel excited about the fact that, there is something helping us, and we have more time at hand to do better things, more creative things, do what we always wanted to do. So, I think, and then that's how we can partner better with everybody. And, that's probably the message I took away from you. So it was very, very enlightening and, very enriching conversation. Thank you, Joel, so much. Whatever you spoke about was so relevant. And coming from you, I think people will take it better. We keep talking about some of these things, but, you are an authority on the subject. And when you talk about it, the kind of absorption that it will lead to, I think, will be much more. So really appreciate your time. I hope that, all our audience is taking it in the right spirit and, willing to willing to understand the urgency and the need to adapt and scale. So hopefully we will all be there as your good partners and help you save that money that you're looking at and then do more with you in the future. So thank you so much.